She never thought the man who raised her would throw her out like trash on a cold, rainy night. The same hands that once comforted her were now pointing toward the street. "Get out of my house. You're selfish and ungrateful." His voice echoed through the neighborhood, words that cut deeper than any knife ever could. But Dad, she had been paying for everything for 6 years. Every single bill, every single expense, every single sacrifice had been hers to bear. Working double shifts, sacrificing her own dreams to keep their family together. While other girls her age were dating and having fun, she was working herself to exhaustion. Every month, paying the mortgage, utilities, groceries, Dad's medications. The numbers never seemed to add up, but somehow she always made it work through sheer determination. Even paying for her brother's college tuition without him knowing, ensuring he could pursue his dreams while she put hers on hold indefinitely. Dad's heart condition meant he couldn't work anymore, and she gladly stepped up to fill that role, never once complaining about the burden. 16-hour shifts became her normal just to keep everyone afloat. Sleep was a luxury she rarely afforded herself, but family came first. Then David came into her life, offering hope and love she thought she'd never experience. He saw her worth beyond what she could provide financially. When he proposed, she thought her sacrifices finally paid off. Someone wanted to build a future with her, not just take from her endlessly. "Dad, Michael, I have amazing news." David proposed. She expected hugs, congratulations, maybe even tears of joy. Instead, she walked into a nightmare. But instead of celebration, she saw anger and disappointment in their eyes. The two people she loved most were looking at her like she was a traitor. "She's going to abandon us, Dad, just like Mom did." Michael's poisonous words planted seeds of doubt in their father's already fragile heart. "After everything I've done for you, this is how you repay me?" The irony was crushing. She was the one who had done everything for them. "Dad, I'm not abandoning anyone. David wants to help our family." But her words fell on deaf ears as pride and manipulation poisoned his judgment. "If you want to choose a man over your family, then go live with him. We don't need you." The suitcase hit the floor with a thud that echoed her breaking heart. As she walked away in the rain, she wondered how 6 years of sacrifice could be forgotten so quickly. But what her father didn't know would destroy them all. Without her income, their comfortable life would crumble within months. The house, the lifestyle, everything depended on her paychecks that would now stop forever. "They'll realize their mistake," David whispered, holding her as she sobbed. "And when they do, it might be too late for them to fix what they've broken." Inside that house, her father felt victorious. But what he didn't know was that his decision would haunt him for the rest of his life. Where are you watching from today? Have you ever sacrificed everything for family, only to be cast aside? Share your thoughts below, and if this story touches your heart, please subscribe for more incredible tales of family, forgiveness, and faith. 6 years ago, when Mom passed away from cancer, Amanda was just 22 years old with dreams of her own future. The funeral felt like the end of everything she knew and loved. Dad couldn't stop crying at the graveside, and Michael was still just a 16-year-old who desperately needed guidance. Someone had to step up and hold their broken family together, and Amanda knew it had to be her. The weight of that responsibility settled on her shoulders like a heavy blanket she would carry for years to come. "I don't understand these numbers, Amanda," Dad whispered, staring at the pile of bills that grew every day. Mom had always handled the finances with such grace and organization, and now they were drowning in medical expenses, mortgage payments, and utilities they never realized cost so much. The paperwork felt overwhelming for a man consumed by grief. Amanda gently took the bills from his trembling hands, knowing she would have to figure this out somehow, even though she was barely an adult herself. Without hesitation, Amanda took over every financial responsibility in their household. She organized bills by due dates, created payment plans that worked within their shrinking budget, and stretched their savings to cover Mom's final medical expenses. Every penny had to be carefully accounted for and managed. She spent countless nights at that kitchen table, calculator in hand, making impossible numbers work through determination and sacrifice. Her own dreams of a carefree young adult life disappeared as she became the family's financial anchor. She had been studying nursing when Mom got sick, but now that dream became their lifeline for survival. Amanda accelerated her studies, working twice as hard as her classmates to graduate early. While other students enjoyed parties and social activities, she buried herself in textbooks and worked part-time jobs to keep food on their table. The irony wasn't lost on her. She was training to heal others while her own family was broken and struggling. But nursing would provide the steady income they desperately needed to survive. The day she got her first nursing job felt like a miracle from heaven. Finally, she could provide steady income for Dad's medications and Michael's needs. But Amanda had no idea how crushing that responsibility would become over the years, or how much of her own life she would sacrifice. The salary seemed generous at first, but when divided between mortgage, utilities, groceries, medications, and Michael's college fund, there was barely anything left for herself. Yet she never complained, viewing it as her sacred duty to keep her family afloat. Michael struggled with his grades after losing Mom, his focus shattered by grief and confusion. Amanda spent her precious evening hours tutoring him, helping with homework, and ensuring he stayed on track for college. "You're going to university," she promised him with fierce determination. "I'll make sure of it." She saw education as his ticket to a better life, the same opportunity she was quietly giving up for herself. Every night, after her exhausting hospital shifts, she would patiently explain math problems and proofread his essays. 1 year after Mom's death, Dad started experiencing chest pains and shortness of breath during simple activities. The cardiologist's diagnosis was devastating. His heart was weakened from stress and grief. "He cannot continue physical labor," the doctor explained. "His working days are over." Amanda felt the weight of supporting 3 people fall entirely on her young shoulders. Dad's disability benefits would barely cover his medications, leaving her salary as their only real source of income for everything else. Dad's heart medications were expensive, even with insurance. Each month, Amanda watched hundreds of dollars disappear for pills that kept him alive and stable. She never complained or showed frustration, but privately wondered how long she could juggle these mounting expenses on a nurse's salary. The medication costs alone could have covered her own apartment rent, but family came first. She learned to budget every dollar carefully, cutting her own expenses to ensure Dad never missed a dose of his life-saving medications. Their evenings fell into an exhausting routine. Amanda would come home drained after 12-hour hospital shifts, only to cook dinner while Dad watched television and Michael chatted with friends. The irony struck her daily. She was the youngest but carried all adult responsibilities. While her peers were dating, traveling, and building their own lives, she was trapped in a cycle of work, bills, and caregiving. Yet seeing her family comfortable and secure made every sacrifice feel worthwhile, even as her own dreams quietly faded. When Michael graduated high school and wanted to attend state university, Amanda didn't hesitate. She took out educational loans using her nursing income as collateral, adding another monthly payment to their already tight budget. "Education is the most important investment," she told herself, even though it meant working extra weekend shifts. She was determined to give Michael opportunities she was quietly sacrificing for herself, believing his future success would justify all her current struggles and sleepless nights of financial worry. 2 years into her nursing career, Amanda's life had become a predictable cycle of work, home, bills, and sleep. She rarely had time for friends or personal interests, let alone romance. That Tuesday afternoon, everything changed when a tall mechanic walked into the emergency department with a nasty cut on his hand from working on an engine. His name was David, and something about his gentle demeanor and grateful smile made her heart skip a beat for the first time in years. She found herself taking extra care with his wound, their conversation flowing naturally despite the clinical setting. "You work too much," David observed during his follow-up visit, noticing the exhaustion in her eyes. "When's the last time you did something just for yourself?" Amanda laughed bitterly, explaining how her entire life revolved around supporting her family. David listened without judgment, sharing his own story of growing up in foster care and understanding the weight of responsibility. For the first time in years, Amanda felt truly heard and understood by someone who didn't need anything from her. Their connection was immediate and profound. Their first official date was at a small diner near the hospital, the only place Amanda could afford with her tight budget. David insisted on paying, and she felt guilty about even that small expense. "You deserve to be taken care of too," he said softly, and Amanda nearly cried at those words. No one had said anything like that to her in 6 years. As they talked over coffee and pie, she realized she was falling for this kind, hardworking man who saw her value beyond what she could provide for others. David started picking her up after her shifts, and those car rides became her favorite part of each day. He would bring her coffee and listen as she vented about difficult patients or financial stress. "You're amazing, Amanda," he would say. "Your family is lucky to have you." For the first time in years, someone was taking care of her emotional needs. She began to imagine a future where she wasn't carrying the world alone, where someone would share her burdens and celebrate her victories. As their relationship deepened over 18 months, Amanda learned that David was everything her father wasn't: responsible, hardworking, and genuinely caring about her well-being. He ran his own small auto repair shop and took pride in honest work. When she visited him at work, she saw how respectfully he treated customers and employees. "I want to build something with you," he told her one evening. "A real partnership where we support each other." The idea was foreign but beautiful to Amanda, who had only known one-sided relationships. When Amanda finally brought David home for dinner, the contrast was stark. Dad barely acknowledged him, focused on his own comfort, while Michael treated David like an intruder. David offered to help with dishes and asked thoughtful questions about their lives, but received cold responses. Later, Amanda apologized for their behavior. "They're not used to outsiders," she explained, though she was beginning to see her family's selfishness through David's kind eyes. The evening opened her eyes to how isolated and unappreciated she had become. "I want to marry you, Amanda," David said during one of their evening walks. "But I'm worried about your family situation. You give everything and get nothing back." Amanda felt torn between love and duty, her heart racing at his words. She had dreamed of marriage, but never thought it was possible with her responsibilities. David continued, "I want to help support them too, but as a team. You shouldn't carry this burden alone anymore." His offer was everything she had secretly hoped for, but never dared to ask. When David proposed 6 months later, it was simple but perfect. "I know you've been taking care of everyone else," he said, kneeling in the jewelry store. "Let me take care of you for the rest of our lives." The ring was modest but beautiful, and Amanda said yes through tears of joy and relief. For the first time in years, she felt like her own person with her own dreams. David promised they would continue helping her family, but as equal partners, not with her carrying the entire burden alone. That night, Amanda stared at her engagement ring and allowed herself to dream of a different future. Maybe she could work normal hours instead of constant overtime. Maybe she could take a vacation or buy herself new clothes. Maybe she could start the family she had always wanted but never thought possible. David had shown her that love didn't have to mean endless sacrifice without reciprocation. She was nervous about telling Dad and Michael, knowing they would see her engagement as a threat to their comfortable arrangement. "Dad, Michael, we have something important to tell you." Amanda began nervously, David's hand supporting hers. "David and I are engaged." She expected surprise, maybe concern about changes, but hoped for eventual happiness for her. Instead, she saw immediate anger flash across both their faces. "What about us?" Michael demanded. "What about everything you've promised?" Dad's expression grew cold and distant. Amanda felt her heart sinking as she realized they saw her engagement not as her happiness, but as their abandonment. C04P01. Living room. Woman, 28, shoulder-length brown hair, warm hazel eyes. Sitting excitedly with man, 30, dark brown hair, kind brown eyes. Man, 22, short blonde hair, green eyes. Pacing angrily. Man, 58, graying dark hair, tired blue eyes. In recliner with stern expression, home interior, tense evening lighting. Dad, Michael, we have wonderful news. Amanda announced with genuine excitement, her engagement ring sparkling under the living room lights. David and I are engaged. She had rehearsed this moment, expecting surprise, maybe some concern about changes, but ultimately hoping for joy and support from the two people she had sacrificed everything for. Instead, the silence that followed felt suffocating. Michael stopped pacing and stared at her with undisguised anger, while Dad's face turned stone cold. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 20 degrees as their expressions shifted from surprise to something much darker. I told you this would happen, Dad, Michael whispered urgently, pulling their father into the kitchen for a private conversation. She's going to abandon us just like Mom did, except Mom didn't have a choice. Amanda is choosing to leave us. His voice dripped with manipulation and self-pity. Think about it. Once she's married, why would she keep paying for everything? Why would she care about your medications or my education? We'll lose everything we've worked for. Michael had always been skilled at playing victim, and now he was using every tool in his arsenal to poison their father's mind against Amanda's happiness. When they returned from the kitchen, Dad's entire demeanor had transformed into something Amanda barely recognized. After everything I've done for you, he began, his voice rising with each word. This is how you repay me? By choosing some stranger over your own family? Amanda felt like she had been slapped. Dad, David isn't a stranger, and I'm not choosing him over you. He wants to help our family, to be part of it. But her father's eyes held a coldness she had never seen before, as if years of love and sacrifice had been erased in a single conversation with her manipulative brother. You're being selfish, Amanda. Michael exploded, his true colors finally showing. What about my tuition? What about Dad's medications? What about the mortgage? You think your boyfriend is going to pay for all that? His voice cracked with fake emotion, but Amanda could see the calculation behind his tears. I've worked so hard in college because you promised me you'd see me through. Now you're going to abandon me in my senior year for some guy you barely know? The accusations hit like physical blows, each one designed to make her feel guilty for wanting her own happiness after years of sacrifice. That's not fair, Michael, Amanda said, her voice breaking as tears began to form. I've given you everything for 6 years. I've worked myself to exhaustion, given up my own dreams, my own life, to make sure you both had everything you needed. Her hands trembled as she spoke. David isn't taking me away from you. He's offering to help us all as a family. He wants to support Dad's medical expenses and help finish your education. Why can't you see that this could be good for everyone? But she could tell from their closed expressions that logic and fairness had no place in this conversation. If you want to choose a man over your family, Dad said with venom Amanda had never heard before, then go live with him. We don't need someone who would abandon her sick father and struggling brother for her own selfish desires. The words hit Amanda like a physical assault. This was the same man she had bathed when he was too weak to shower, the same man whose medications she had never missed a payment for, whose every comfort she had ensured for years. Dad, please, she whispered, but he had already turned his back on her, his mind poisoned beyond reason by Michael's manipulation. Pack your things and get out, Dad commanded from the hallway, his voice echoing through the house like a judge pronouncing sentence. Amanda couldn't believe this was happening. 6 years of sacrifice, of putting her family before every personal desire. And this was how it ended? David helped her throw clothes into suitcases, his own heart breaking as he watched the woman he loved being destroyed by the very people she had devoted her life to protecting. I'm so sorry, he whispered. I never wanted this to happen. But Amanda was too numb with shock and betrayal to respond. As Amanda stood at the front door with her suitcases, rain beginning to fall outside, she made one last desperate attempt to reach the father she had loved and cared for so devotedly. Dad, I paid every bill in this house for 6 years. I've sacrificed my 20s, my education, my dreams, everything for this family. How can you throw me out for wanting to build a life with someone who loves me? But Dad's face remained hard as stone, his heart seemingly turned to ice by Michael's poisonous words. You made your choice, he said coldly. Now live with it. As the front door slammed behind her with devastating finality, Amanda stood in the pouring rain, feeling like her entire world had collapsed. The house she had saved from foreclosure multiple times, the family she had kept fed and medicated and comfortable, had just cast her out like she was nothing. David wrapped his arms around her shaking shoulders as she sobbed uncontrollably. "I'm so sorry, baby," he whispered in her hair. "We'll get through this together. You don't deserve any of this." But Amanda felt like she was drowning in a sea of betrayal and ingratitude that threatened to pull her under forever. As they drove away from the only home Amanda had known as an adult, she couldn't stop the flood of tears that came from years of suppressed hurt and exhaustion. "They have no idea what they've just done," David said quietly, his hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. "Without your income, they're going to lose everything within months. The house, the comfortable lifestyle, Michael's education, it all depended on you." Amanda nodded through her tears, knowing he was right. Her father and brother had just destroyed their own lives out of selfishness and pride, and when reality hit them, it would be too late to undo the damage they had caused. Moving into David's small apartment above his auto shop felt surreal after years of managing her father's comfortable suburban home. The space was tiny but clean, filled with the smell of motor oil from below and the warmth of genuine love. "It's not much," David said apologetically, "but it's ours now. No one can throw you out, no one can make demands, and no one can take advantage of your kindness anymore." Amanda looked around the modest space and felt something she hadn't experienced in years: peace. For the first time since her mother's death, she was living somewhere that didn't require her constant financial sacrifice to maintain. The hardest part of leaving wasn't the emotional pain. It was the practical decision to stop all financial support to her father's household. Amanda sat in the bank, closing the automatic payments she had set up years ago for their mortgage, utilities, and Dad's medication refills. "Are you sure about this, Miss Thompson?" the banker asked, noticing her trembling hands. "These payments have been automatic for years." Amanda nodded firmly, though her heart was breaking. "They made their choice," she said quietly. "Now they'll have to live with the consequences of throwing away the only person who is keeping them afloat financially." David tried to distract her from the guilt and worry that consumed her thoughts about her family's financial situation. "You did nothing wrong, Amanda," he reminded her constantly. "You gave them 6 years of your life, your money, your dreams, everything. They chose to throw that away because they couldn't stand the thought of you being happy." But Amanda couldn't shake the mental images of Dad struggling to pay for his heart medications or the house going into foreclosure. Years of being responsible for their welfare had created a sense of guilt that was impossible to simply turn off, even when logic told her she had done more than enough. For the first time in years, Amanda went grocery shopping for just 2 people instead of a household of 3 adults. The freedom was intoxicating and terrifying simultaneously. "We can actually afford good food," David laughed, putting stakes in their cart. "You don't have to live on ramen and generic brands anymore." Amanda stared at their modest but adequate grocery budget with amazement. Without supporting her father's expensive medication needs, Michael's college expenses, and the mortgage on a house she didn't even own, her nursing salary suddenly felt generous. She realized how much of her own basic needs she had been sacrificing without even recognizing it. Meanwhile, back at the house Amanda had maintained for years, reality was beginning to set in with crushing force. Dad sat surrounded by bills that had always magically been paid on time, now understanding for the first time how expensive their comfortable lifestyle actually was. "She'll come back," he muttered to Michael, but his voice lacked conviction. "She has to come back. She wouldn't really let us lose the house." But the mortgage payment was due in 10 days, his heart medication prescription needed refilling, and for the first time in 6 years, there was no Amanda to automatically handle these life-sustaining financial obligations. "Dad, there's no food," Michael announced with growing panic, staring into the refrigerator that Amanda had always kept fully stocked. "And my tuition payment is due next week for my final semester." The magnitude of their dependence on Amanda was becoming undeniably clear. Dad checked his bank account and felt his heart skip a beat. His disability payments barely covered his medications, let alone food, utilities, and Michael's college expenses. She was paying for everything, he whispered in dawning horror. I never realized how much everything actually costs. The comfortable bubble they had lived in for years was rapidly deflating, leaving them exposed to financial reality. Michael was forced to meet with the university financial aid counselor when his tuition payment bounced. I'm sorry, Mr. Thompson, but you're in your final semester. Emergency aid is extremely limited at this point, the counselor explained sympathetically. You'll need to either pay the full amount immediately or withdraw from classes. The reality hit Michael like a physical blow. Without Amanda's financial support, his dreams of graduating were crumbling. But I only have one semester left, he pleaded desperately. There has to be something you can do. The counselor shook her head sadly. You should have planned for this situation earlier. Emergency withdrawal might be your only option now. Amanda tried to focus on building her new life with David, but the guilt was overwhelming. I keep thinking about Dad, trying to figure out which bills to pay first, she confessed, tears streaming down her face. And Michael having to drop out so close to graduation. David sat beside her, offering comfort while struggling with his own conflicted feelings. You can't save people who don't want to be saved, especially when they've proven they'll throw you away the moment it's convenient, he said gently. You gave them everything, and they gave you nothing but demands and ingratitude in return. Their current situation is entirely their own making. 6 weeks after Amanda's departure, the inevitable happened. The bright orange foreclosure notice appeared on the front door of the house she had worked herself to exhaustion to maintain. Neighbors whispered and stared as Dad stood in his bathrobe, reading the legal document that gave them 30 days to vacate the property or face eviction. This can't be happening, he muttered, but the numbers didn't lie. Without Amanda's reliable nursing income covering the mortgage payments, they had defaulted immediately. The home that had represented stability and comfort for their family was about to be seized by the bank, and there was nothing left they could do to stop it. When the phone call came from her panicked father, Amanda's first instinct was still to rescue them from the disaster they had created. Amanda, please. Dad's voice was broken and desperate. We're going to lose everything. I didn't realize how much you were doing for us. Can you please come home and help us figure this out? But David gently took the phone from her trembling hands. She's not responsible for fixing your mistakes anymore, he said firmly before hanging up. Amanda collapsed into his arms, torn between the ingrained habit of rescuing her family and the knowledge that they had forfeited any right to her help when they threw her out for wanting happiness. 3 months after Amanda's departure, the house that had once been the pride of their neighborhood was showing clear signs of decline and neglect. The lawn was overgrown, paint was peeling from the shutters, and the bright orange foreclosure notice had become a permanent fixture on the front door. Margaret, the elderly neighbor who had watched Amanda sacrifice her youth for her ungrateful family, stood at her fence shaking her head in disappointment. She had witnessed every early morning when Amanda left for double shifts and every late evening when she returned exhausted. And now she was watching the predictable consequences of throwing away such a devoted daughter unfold in real time. Michael had been forced to drop out of college just 1 semester before graduation and find immediate employment to help with their desperate financial situation. The only job he could find with his limited experience was manual labor at a construction site, working 10-hour days in the blazing sun for minimum wage. His soft hands, accustomed to computer keyboards and textbooks, were now blistered and calloused from operating heavy machinery and carrying materials. This is all Amanda's fault, he muttered bitterly during his lunch break, still refusing to accept responsibility for his role in destroying their family stability. The irony was lost on him that he was now experiencing the exhaustion Amanda had endured for years to keep him comfortable. Dad's health was deteriorating rapidly without Amanda's careful management of his medical needs and nutrition. His heart medications had run out 2 weeks ago, but without insurance coverage and Amanda's financial support, the prescription refills were impossibly expensive. He rationed his remaining pills, taking them every other day instead of daily as prescribed, hoping to make them last longer. The chest pains were returning with increasing frequency and severity, but he was too proud to admit that his daughter's absence was literally killing him. His hands shook as he counted the remaining pills, knowing that each one might be keeping him alive for another day. Their first grocery shopping trip without Amanda's financial support was a harsh wake-up call to the reality of their situation. Dad and Michael stood in the cereal aisle, staring at prices they had never noticed before, their cart containing only the most basic necessities. Milk is $5. Dad whispered in disbelief. How did Amanda afford to keep us fed so well? They had taken for granted the full refrigerator, the varied meals, the snacks and treats that had always appeared magically in their kitchen. Now, with Michael's minimum wage job and Dad's tiny disability check, they were learning to survive on beans, rice, and whatever was marked down for quick sale. Margaret had watched the deterioration of her neighbors with growing concern and finally decided to intervene with some hard truths. "Richard," she said firmly, inviting him for coffee on her porch, "you made the biggest mistake of your life when you threw Amanda out of that house." Dad's pride bristled at her words, but she continued relentlessly. "That girl worked herself to the bone for 6 years, keeping you and Michael comfortable. She paid every bill, bought every meal, covered every expense, and never asked for anything in return except your love and support. And what did you do the moment she found happiness? You threw her away like garbage." The words hit him like physical blows because he was finally beginning to understand their terrible truth. The final mortgage notice arrived on a Tuesday morning, giving them just 14 days to pay the full amount owed or face immediate eviction proceedings. Dad sat at the kitchen table where Amanda had once balanced their budget so carefully, surrounded by unpaid utility bills, medical bills, and final notices he had no idea how to handle. The total amount owed was more than 3 times Michael's monthly salary, and even if they sold everything they owned, it wouldn't cover half the debt. "She made it look so easy," he whispered, remembering how Amanda had somehow always made the numbers work, stretching every dollar through careful planning and endless sacrifice. Now he understood that their comfortable lifestyle had been entirely dependent on her financial management and generous heart. Michael swallowed his pride and visited the Employment Assistance Office, desperately seeking higher-paying work to save their home. "I'm sorry, Mr. Thompson," the counselor explained sympathetically, "but without completing your degree, you're not qualified for most positions that pay significantly more than what you're currently earning. Your best option might be to return to school and finish that final semester." Michael's face flushed with anger and frustration. "I can't afford to go back to school. We're about to lose our house." The counselor nodded understandingly. "Then perhaps you should contact whoever was helping you financially before. Education loans, family support, scholarships, whatever was covering your expenses previously." Michael's heart sank as he realized there was only one person who had ever supported his education, and he had helped drive her away. Meanwhile, Amanda was slowly learning to live for herself instead of constantly worrying about others' needs and problems. Her life with David had settled into a peaceful routine of shared responsibilities and mutual support that felt foreign but wonderful after years of one-sided sacrifice. "How was your day?" David asked, kissing her cheek as she cooked dinner for just the two of them. For the first time in 6 years, Amanda was working regular shifts instead of constant overtime, had money left over after paying bills, and was building a relationship based on partnership rather than financial dependence. Yet despite this newfound peace, she couldn't completely silence the voice in her head, wondering if Dad was taking his medications and whether Michael had enough food to eat. Margaret had watched enough of her neighbors suffering and decided to take action that might save their family before it was too late. She found Amanda's work number through the hospital directory and made a call that would change everything. "Amanda, dear, this is Margaret from next door to your father's house," she began gently. "I know it's not my place to interfere, but I think you should know what's happening over here. Your father is very sick without his medications, and they're about to lose the house. I'm not asking you to forgive them or come back, but I thought you should know the situation before it's too late to make any difference." The phone call would force Amanda to confront the most difficult decision of her young life. Amanda hung up the phone with Margaret and sat in stunned silence in the hospital break room, her hands trembling as the full weight of her family's situation crashed over her like a tidal wave. They were about to lose everything: the house, Dad's health, Michael's future, all because of the pride and manipulation that had driven her away when she tried to build a life of her own. Part of her felt vindicated that they were finally experiencing the consequences of their selfishness and ingratitude, but a larger part of her was horrified at the thought of Dad suffering without his medications or dying alone because she wasn't there to take care of him. The little girl inside her, who still loved her father despite everything, was screaming at her to go home and fix everything, just like she always had before. Margaret had spent 3 sleepless nights watching her neighbor's health deteriorate and their family fall apart before finally deciding to intervene in a situation that was breaking her heart. She had Amanda's work number from the hospital directory and knew this phone call might be the last chance to save what remained of their family before pride and stubbornness destroyed them completely. Amanda deserves to know what's happening, she muttered to herself as she dialed, even if they don't deserve her help. Her weathered hands trembled slightly as she waited for the call to connect, knowing she was about to deliver news that would force Amanda to make an impossible choice between her new happiness and her family's survival. When Margaret's call came that evening, Amanda listened in growing horror as the elderly neighbor described the complete collapse of her father's household in devastating detail. "Your father hasn't been taking his heart medication regularly because he can't afford the refills," Margaret explained gently but firmly. "He's rationing pills that are supposed to be taken daily, and I've seen him clutching his chest in pain more and more frequently. The foreclosure is final in 10 days, and Michael is working construction 12 hours a day just to buy groceries." Amanda felt the familiar weight of responsibility crushing down on her shoulders as David watched helplessly, knowing exactly what thoughts were running through her mind despite everything her family had done to her. "I have to tell you something before you make any decisions," Amanda said to David with tears streaming down her face. "I'm pregnant. For months." David's eyes widened with joy and concern as he pulled her into his arms, understanding immediately why this news made the situation even more complicated. "We're going to have a family of our own now," she whispered against his chest. "I should be thinking about our baby's future, not rescuing the people who threw me out for wanting happiness." But even as she spoke the words, Amanda knew that her conscience wouldn't let her watch her father suffer or die, no matter how badly he had treated her. The baby growing inside her made every decision feel more urgent and emotionally charged. David struggled with conflicting emotions as he watched the woman he loved being torn apart by impossible choices and undeserved guilt. "Amanda, they made their choice when they threw you out in the rain," he said firmly but gently. "Your father chose pride over his daughter's happiness, and Michael chose manipulation over gratitude. You don't owe them anything, especially not now when we're starting our own family." But he could see in her eyes that logic and fairness had no power over the deep-seated sense of responsibility that had been drilled into her since she was 22 years old. "If you go back to help them, how do I know they won't just use you again and throw you away when it's convenient?" he asked, voicing his deepest fear about losing her to their endless neediness and ingratitude. After 2 days of agonizing internal debate, Amanda made the decision that her conscience demanded, despite the potential cost to her own emotional well-being and new family's future. She and David drove to her father's house, her heart pounding as she saw the foreclosure notice still prominently displayed and the obvious signs of neglect that spoke to their desperate circumstances. "I need to do this," she told David as they stood on the porch where she had been thrown out months earlier. "Not because they deserve it, but because I need to be able to look at myself in the mirror and know I didn't let my father die out of spite." David squeezed her hand supportively, though every instinct told him this was a mistake that would only lead to more heartbreak and exploitation. When Dad answered the door, Amanda was shocked by how much his appearance had deteriorated in just 3 months without her care and support. He had lost significant weight, his skin was pale and drawn, and his breathing seemed labored even from the simple effort of walking to the door. "Amanda," he whispered in disbelief, as if seeing a ghost from his past. The proud, stubborn man who had thrown her out with such righteous anger now looked broken and defeated by the consequences of his choices. I didn't think you'd ever come back after what I said to you. His voice cracked with emotion as he struggled to find words for a situation that his pride had never allowed him to imagine, having to face the daughter he had wronged when he desperately needed her help to survive. Amanda immediately went into caretaker mode, examining Dad's medication bottles and finding them either empty or containing dangerously small amounts of pills that should have been refilled weeks ago. "Dad, you can't skip doses of heart medication," she said with professional concern overriding her personal hurt. "This could literally kill you." The irony wasn't lost on either of them, that she was once again taking care of his medical needs after he had accused her of abandoning the family. "I couldn't afford the refills," he admitted quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't realize how expensive everything was when you were handling it all." The admission hung in the air between them, like a confession of guilt that came months too late to prevent the damage his pride and Michael's manipulation had caused. "I need you both to understand something," Amanda said, her voice stronger than it had been in months as she placed a protective hand over her growing belly. "I'm pregnant with David's child, and my priority now has to be my own family's future and security." Dad's eyes widened as he processed this news that changed everything about their situation and his expectations. "I'm willing to help you get back on your feet and save the house, but things are going to be different this time. No more taking advantage of my guilt and sense of duty. No more treating me like I exist solely to solve your problems." Her tone was firm, but not cruel. The voice of a woman who had finally learned to set boundaries after years of being used and unappreciated by the people she loved most. "Amanda," Dad's voice broke as tears began streaming down his weathered face, the weight of his mistakes finally crushing through the wall of pride that had protected him from accepting responsibility for months. "I'm so sorry for what I said to you, for how I treated you after everything you sacrificed for us. I was scared of losing you, and Michael convinced me that your marriage would mean abandonment. But I see now that I threw away the most precious thing in my life." His apology was raw and genuine, filled with the kind of regret that comes from nearly losing everything that matters. "You were never the selfish one. I was. You gave us everything, and I gave you nothing but demands and ingratitude in return. Can you ever forgive a foolish old man who almost destroyed his family out of pride and fear?" Amanda felt her carefully constructed emotional walls beginning to crumble as she watched her father's genuine remorse and suffering. But David's protective presence reminded her that forgiveness didn't have to mean returning to old patterns of exploitation and sacrifice. "I forgive you, Dad," she said quietly, tears matching his own. "But forgiveness doesn't erase consequences, and it doesn't mean going back to the way things were before." She sat down beside him on the couch where they had shared so many family moments before everything fell apart. "I'll help you save the house and get your medications, but you and Michael need to understand that I have my own family to think about now. David and our baby have to come first in my life, and if you can't accept that, then this reconciliation won't work." Her words were a careful balance of love and strength, offering hope while demanding respect. 3 days after Amanda's emotional reunion with her father, an urgent knocking at David's apartment door interrupted their quiet evening together. Michael stood in the hallway looking more desperate and broken than Amanda had ever seen him, his usual arrogance replaced by genuine panic and fear. His construction work clothes were dirty and torn. His hands were blistered from manual labor, and dark circles under his eyes spoke to sleepless nights spent worrying about their family's future. "Amanda, please," he said the moment she opened the door, his voice cracking with emotion. "I know I don't deserve to ask anything from you after what I did, but Dad is really sick, and I don't know what to do anymore." The proud, manipulative young man who had poisoned their father's mind against her was gone, replaced by a scared boy who finally understood the consequences of his actions. Amanda and David listened in growing concern as Michael described their father's rapidly deteriorating condition with genuine fear and desperation in his voice. "He collapsed at the grocery store yesterday," Michael explained, his hands shaking as he spoke. "The paramedics said his heart is under severe stress from not taking his medications regularly. The doctor wants to do an emergency procedure, but it costs $8,000, and our insurance won't cover it because Dad missed too many premium payments. The irony wasn't lost on any of them that the medical crisis stemmed directly from the financial chaos created when they drove Amanda away. Michael's voice broke completely as he continued. I'm working 70 hours a week, but it's not enough. I can't save him alone, and I don't know who else to turn to. Amanda felt the familiar weight of family responsibility crushing down on her shoulders, made even heavier by the knowledge that she was now responsible for her unborn child's future as well as her own. Michael, you helped convince Dad to throw me out when I tried to build a life of my own, she said quietly, her voice steady but filled with hurt. You manipulated him into believing that my happiness meant your abandonment, and you never once acknowledged how much I sacrificed for this family. Michael's face crumpled with shame as her words hit home, but she continued, now you're asking me to sacrifice again, to risk my own family's financial security to save the people who threw me away when it was convenient. The room fell silent as the full weight of their past choices and current desperation hung in the air between them. Michael did something Amanda had never seen in their entire lives together. He got down on his knees in front of her and began to cry with genuine remorse and self-recognition. You're right about everything, he sobbed, his pride completely shattered by the consequences of his selfishness and manipulation. I was scared of losing the comfortable life you provided, so I turned Dad against you when you found happiness. I was selfish and ungrateful, and I never appreciated how much you gave up for us. His tears were raw and genuine, the first honest emotion Amanda had seen from him since their mother's death. I don't deserve your help, and I know I can't undo the damage I caused, but please don't let Dad die because of my mistakes. I'll do anything to make this right. I'll work for the rest of my life to pay you back. Just please don't let him suffer for what I did. David pulled Amanda into the kitchen for a private conversation, his protective instincts warring with his understanding of her generous heart and family loyalty. Baby, I know what you're thinking, he said gently, taking her hands in his. And I love that you have such a forgiving heart, but we have to think about our own family now. We're saving for the baby, for our wedding, for our future together. Amanda nodded, tears streaming down her face as she struggled with the impossible choice between her new family security and her father's life. I know you're right, she whispered, but I can't live with myself if Dad dies when I have the power to save him. Even after everything they've done, he's still my father, and that little girl inside me still loves him despite all the hurt and betrayal. David's heart broke seeing her torn between duty and self-preservation. Against David's better judgment, but with his reluctant support, Amanda made the decision that her conscience demanded, even knowing it might cost her family's financial security and emotional peace. I'll help pay for Dad's surgery, she told Michael, watching relief flood his face. But this comes with non-negotiable conditions that you both have to accept. Michael nodded eagerly, willing to agree to anything that might save their father's life. First, this is a loan, not a gift. You'll pay me back every penny with a payment plan we'll put in writing. Second, I'm not moving back home or returning to my old role as family caretaker. My husband and baby come first in my life now, and that's never going to change. Her terms were firm but fair, offering help while protecting her new family's interests and her own hard-won independence. The next morning, Amanda and David went to the hospital to handle the financial arrangements for her father's emergency cardiac procedure. Amanda's nursing connections helping them navigate the complex medical and insurance bureaucracy. Are you sure about this? David asked one final time as they walked toward the financial counselor's office. Once we write this check, our savings for the baby will be gone, and we'll be starting over financially. Amanda squeezed his hand, grateful for his support even when he disagreed with her decision. I have to be able to live with myself, she replied quietly. I can rebuild our savings, but I can't bring Dad back from the dead if I let him die out of spite. Our baby deserves to be born into a family that chooses love over revenge, even when it's difficult and costly. Writing the check for $8,000 felt like giving away their future, but Amanda signed the documents with steady hands, knowing she was making the right choice for her own peace of mind and moral integrity. The money represented months of careful saving for baby furniture, maternity leave, and wedding expenses, all sacrificed to save the man who had thrown her out for wanting happiness. This payment covers the full procedure, the financial counselor confirmed, and your father could be scheduled for surgery as early as tomorrow morning. Amanda felt a mixture of relief and anxiety, knowing she had potentially saved Dad's life while risking her own family's financial stability. David's hand on her shoulder reminded her that she wasn't facing this sacrifice alone, even if the cost was higher than they could comfortably afford. As they waited for news about Dad's surgery, Amanda struggled with conflicting emotions about her decision to help the family that had caused her so much pain and betrayal. "I still can't believe I'm here," she confided to David, her hand protectively covering her growing belly. "6 months ago, they threw me out in the rain for wanting to marry you. Now I'm risking our baby's financial security to save Dad's life." David pulled her closer, understanding the complex mix of love, duty, and resentment that drove her choices. "You're a better person than they deserve," he said softly, "but that's one of the reasons I fell in love with you. You choose compassion even when it costs you everything." Amanda wondered if her decision was wise or foolish, but she knew it was the only choice she could live with. When Dad woke up from surgery, groggy but alive, Amanda was sitting beside his hospital bed despite everything that had happened between them in the past months. "Amanda," he whispered, confused about whether he was dreaming or if she had really come to save his life after he had treated her so cruelly. "Why are you here? After what I did to you?" His voice trailed off as the reality of her presence and sacrifice began to sink in. "Because you're still my father," she replied simply, though her voice carried the weight of all the hurt and forgiveness that complicated their relationship. "And because I needed to be able to look at my child someday and know that I chose love over revenge, even when it was the harder path." Dad's eyes filled with tears as he understood the magnitude of her sacrifice and the depth of forgiveness he had never deserved but somehow received. Over the following days, Amanda found herself spending more time at Dad's bedside than she had planned, her nursing instincts and deeply ingrained sense of duty overriding her attempts to maintain emotional distance. She monitored his vitals, spoke with doctors about his recovery progress, and ensured he was taking his medications properly, falling back into the caretaker role that had defined her relationship with him for years. "You don't have to stay," Dad said weakly, his voice filled with gratitude and shame. "I know you have your own life to live now, and I don't deserve this kindness after how I treated you." But Amanda couldn't bring herself to leave, despite knowing that every hour spent at his bedside was emotionally reopening wounds that had barely begun to heal from months of separation and betrayal. The cardiologist pulled Amanda aside for a private conversation that would change everything about Dad's prognosis and their family's future together. "Miss Thompson, I need to be completely honest with you about your father's condition," Dr. Martinez said gravely. "The surgery was successful in clearing the immediate blockage, but his heart muscle has sustained significant damage from months of inadequate medication management and stress." Amanda felt her stomach drop as she processed the implications of his words. Without proper care, medication compliance, and regular monitoring, he's at extremely high risk for another cardiac event within the next few months. He needs someone who understands his medical needs and can ensure he follows the treatment protocol exactly, or frankly, he may not survive much longer. The doctor's words hit Amanda like a physical blow, making her realize that her father's life might literally depend on her continued involvement in his care. When Amanda returned home each evening from the hospital, David could see the emotional toll that caring for her father was taking on her physical and mental health. "You're falling back into old patterns," he observed gently but firmly, sitting beside her on their couch. "You're exhausting yourself trying to save someone who threw you away, and I'm worried about what this stress is doing to you and our baby." Amanda knew he was right, but the guilt and ingrained sense of responsibility were overwhelming her attempts to maintain healthy boundaries. "I can see his heart monitor, David," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I know when his readings are dangerous, And I know what could happen if I'm not there to advocate for his care. How do I walk away from that knowledge and live with myself if something happens to him? The moral dilemma was tearing her apart inside. On the fourth night of Dad's hospital stay, Amanda fell asleep in the uncomfortable chair beside his bed after monitoring his condition through a particularly difficult evening of irregular heart rhythms and breathing problems. Dad lay awake in the darkness, watching the daughter he had wronged so terribly sacrificing her rest and health to ensure his survival, and the full weight of his mistakes crashed over him like a tidal wave of regret and self-recognition. "What have I done?" he whispered to himself, seeing clearly for the first time how selfishly he had treated the person who loved him most unconditionally. Amanda's gentle breathing and the protective way her hand rested on her growing belly reminded him that she was building a new life that should take precedence over his needs. Yet here she was, once again putting his welfare before her own, because that's who she had always been, selfless, devoted, and forgiving beyond what he deserved. When Amanda woke up the next morning with a crick in her neck from sleeping in the hospital chair, Dad was already awake and watching her with an expression she hadn't seen since childhood, pure, unconditional love mixed with profound remorse. "Amanda, we need to talk," he said softly, his voice stronger than it had been since the surgery. "Really talk about everything that's happened and everything I need to say before it's too late." Amanda straightened in her chair, sensing that something important was about to happen between them. "I've been lying here all night thinking about what a terrible father I've been to you," he continued, his voice beginning to crack with emotion. "Not just when I threw you out, but for years before that. I let you sacrifice your youth, your dreams, your entire 20s to take care of Michael and me, and I never once told you how grateful I was or asked what you needed for yourself." His words were opening floodgates of emotion that both of them had kept locked away for years. "When your mother died, I was so lost and broken that I let you become her replacement in every way except the love and appreciation she deserved," Dad continued, tears streaming down his weathered face. "You were just a baby yourself, only 22 years old, and I burdened you with responsibilities that should never have been yours to carry alone." Amanda felt her own tears beginning to flow as years of suppressed hurt and acknowledgement finally found voice between them. "You worked yourself to exhaustion for us, paid every bill, sacrificed every dream, and what did I give you in return? Demands, expectations, and ultimately betrayal when you tried to build a life of your own." His voice broke completely as he reached for her hand, his touch gentle and seeking forgiveness. "I was so afraid of losing you that I drove you away, and in doing so, I almost lost the most precious gift God ever gave me, a daughter with the biggest, most generous heart in the world. Dad, I forgave you the moment I walked back into that house." Amanda sobbed, finally allowing herself to voice the unconditional love that had never wavered despite all the hurt and betrayal. "I was angry and hurt, but I never stopped loving you, even when you broke my heart into a million pieces." The words poured out of her like water, breaking through a dam that had held back years of pain and forgiveness. "I just wanted you to see me as more than a solution to your problems. I wanted you to care about my happiness, to support my dreams, to be proud of the woman I was becoming instead of only valuing what I could provide for everyone else." Dad squeezed her hand tighter, understanding finally hitting him with devastating clarity. "I was proud of you every single day," he whispered through his tears. "I just never told you because I was too selfish and scared to risk losing the person who made our family possible." For the first time since her mother's funeral, Amanda and her father held each other with complete honesty and mutual understanding, all pretenses and resentments falling away in the face of genuine love and hard-won forgiveness. "I'm so sorry, my beautiful daughter," Dad whispered into her hair, his voice thick with emotion and regret. "I'm sorry for taking your sacrifice for granted, for never appreciating your generous heart, for throwing you away when you deserve my blessing and support." Amanda melted into his embrace, feeling like the little girl who used to curl up in his lap during thunderstorms, before responsibility and loss had complicated their relationship beyond recognition. "I love you, Dad," she whispered back, meaning it completely despite everything they had endured. And I want our baby to know their grandfather as the man who learned to choose love over pride, even when it was hard to admit his mistakes. Their emotional reconciliation was interrupted when Michael arrived for his daily visit, carrying coffee and looking genuinely surprised to find his father and sister in what appeared to be a peaceful, loving conversation rather than the tense medical consultation he had expected. "Is everything okay?" he asked cautiously, sensing the shift in atmosphere, but unsure whether it was positive or concerning. "Everything is going to be okay," Dad said firmly, his voice stronger and more certain than it had been in months. "Your sister has forgiven me for being a stubborn, ungrateful old fool, and now we're going to figure out how to be a real family again, one that supports each other's happiness instead of just taking advantage of each other's generosity." Michael's eyes widened as he processed this development, realizing that the dynamics he had manipulated for his own benefit were about to change permanently, hopefully for the better this time. "There are going to be some changes in how our family operates from now on," Amanda announced, her voice carrying newfound authority and self-respect that both men recognized and respected. "Dad, you're going to follow your medication schedule exactly as prescribed, attend all your follow-up appointments, and take care of your health so you can be around to meet your grandchild and watch them grow up." She turned to Michael with equal firmness. "And you're going to finish your college degree, get a good job, and start contributing to this family financially instead of just taking from it. No more manipulation, no more playing victim, and no more expecting other people to solve your problems while you coast through life." Both men nodded solemnly, understanding that Amanda's forgiveness came with expectations of real change and genuine growth. For the first time in years, their family felt like it might actually have a healthy, sustainable future built on mutual respect and shared responsibility rather than exploitation and resentment. 1 year after the painful separation and gradual reconciliation that had tested every bond in their family, Amanda gave birth to a beautiful daughter they named Hope, a name that perfectly captured the healing and new beginnings that had emerged from their darkest moments. The delivery was smooth and joyful, with David holding her hand throughout the entire process and whispering words of love and encouragement that reminded her how far they had traveled together from that rainy night when she was thrown out with her suitcases. "She's perfect," Amanda whispered, gazing down at her daughter's tiny face and feeling overwhelmed with gratitude for the family they had built together despite every obstacle and challenge. Hope's arrival represented not just new life, but the promise of a future built on healthy love rather than obligation and sacrifice. When Dad first held his granddaughter, tears streamed down his face as he realized he almost missed this precious moment due to his own pride and stubbornness. "Hello, little Hope," he whispered to the tiny bundle in his arms, his voice thick with emotion and wonder. "I'm your grandfather, and I promise to be a better man for you than I was for your mama." Amanda watched this tender scene with a full heart, knowing that her daughter would grow up knowing a grandfather who had learned from his mistakes and chosen growth over pride. Dad's health had improved dramatically over the past year with proper medication management and regular medical care, allowing him to be present for this milestone that might have been impossible if Amanda hadn't found the strength to forgive and help when it mattered most. Michael's transformation over the past year had been remarkable and genuine, culminating in his graduation from college just 2 days before Hope's birth. He arrived at the hospital still wearing his cap and gown, proudly showing Amanda his diploma and the job offer he had received from an engineering firm that would finally allow him to contribute financially to their family instead of just taking from it. "I couldn't have done this without your forgiveness and second chance," he told Amanda earnestly, his maturity and gratitude a stark contrast to the manipulative young man who had nearly destroyed their family. "I know I can never fully repay what you sacrificed for my education, but I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of your love and generosity." Amanda felt proud of the man her brother was becoming and hopeful that their family could finally function as a team rather than a burden. Life with David and baby Hope had settled into a rhythm of shared responsibilities and mutual support that still felt miraculous to Amanda after years of carrying everyone else's burdens alone. David had expanded their apartment above the auto shop to include a nursery, and his business was thriving well enough to support their growing family comfortably without requiring Amanda to work excessive overtime or sacrifice her own needs. "I never knew life could feel this peaceful," Amanda confided to David during one of their quiet evening moments together. "For the first time since Mom died, I'm living for my own family's happiness instead of trying to solve everyone else's problems." David kissed her forehead gently, understanding how significant this simple domestic contentment was for a woman who had given up so much of herself to keep others afloat. 6 months after Hope's birth, Amanda and David finally had the wedding they had dreamed of, a small, intimate ceremony in a garden venue with only their closest family and friends in attendance. Dad walked Amanda down the aisle while she carried baby Hope, symbolizing how their family had been rebuilt on a foundation of forgiveness, respect, and healthy boundaries rather than obligation and resentment. "I'm so proud to give you to a man who values your happiness," Dad whispered as they reached the altar where David waited with tears of joy in his eyes. The ceremony was simple but meaningful, representing not just the union of two people in love, but the triumph of choosing hope and healing over bitterness and revenge. Michael served as David's best man, his presence a testament to how much their family dynamics had changed for the better. At the reception, Margaret pulled Amanda aside for a conversation that brought their journey full circle from the desperate phone call that had started their reconciliation process. "I'm so proud of the woman you've become," the elderly neighbor said with genuine affection and admiration. "You chose forgiveness when you had every right to choose revenge, and you saved your family without losing yourself in the process." Amanda hugged the woman who had been instrumental in bringing them back together, grateful for her wisdom and intervention during their darkest hour. "You taught me that love doesn't mean accepting abuse," Amanda replied. "You can forgive people and still protect yourself by setting healthy boundaries. That's been the key to rebuilding our relationships on equal terms rather than exploitation." Margaret smiled knowingly, understanding that Amanda had finally learned the difference between loving generously and being taken advantage of. 2 years after their wedding, Amanda and David had saved enough money to buy their own home, a modest but comfortable house with a yard where Hope could play and room for their family to grow. The financial stability they had built together felt secure and sustainable, based on shared goals and mutual support rather than one person carrying impossible burdens. "Remember when you thought you'd never have your own life?" David teased gently as they unpacked boxes in their new kitchen. "Now look at us, our own home, our beautiful daughter, successful careers, and family relationships that actually add joy to our lives instead of stress." Amanda looked around their new home with wonder, still sometimes amazed that she had been able to build this life of contentment and peace after years of sacrifice and heartbreak. Amanda had begun volunteering at a local community center, sharing her story with young women who were struggling with family responsibilities and codependent relationships that threatened their own dreams and well-being. "I want you to understand that loving your family doesn't mean sacrificing your entire life for their comfort," she told a group of college-age women during one of her workshops. "You can be generous and supportive without becoming a doormat, and you can set boundaries without becoming selfish." Her message resonated deeply with women who recognized their own struggles in her story. Forgiveness is powerful, but it doesn't require you to return to toxic patterns or accept disrespectful treatment. True healing happens when relationships become mutual and healthy, not when you just go back to being used. Her speaking engagements had become a source of purpose and healing, helping others avoid the pitfalls she had experienced. Their monthly family dinners had become a cherished tradition that demonstrated how much their relationships had healed and matured over the past 3 years. Dad, now healthy and actively involved in Hope's life as a devoted grandfather, helped with childcare and contributed to family gatherings in meaningful ways. Michael, working as a successful engineer and in a serious relationship of his own, had become a supportive uncle who understood the value of giving rather than just taking for family relationships. "I can't believe how different everything is now," Amanda mused during one of these dinners, watching Hope giggle as her grandfather made silly faces. We went from a family that functioned through guilt and obligation to one that actually enjoys being together. The contrast with their painful past made their current happiness feel even more precious and intentional. As Amanda read bedtime stories to 3-year-old Hope in their comfortable living room, she reflected on the incredible journey that had brought them to this moment of peace and contentment. The scared 22-year-old who had sacrificed everything for an ungrateful family seemed like a different person from the confident woman who had learned to balance love with self-respect, generosity with boundaries, and forgiveness with wisdom. "Mama," Hope said sleepily, snuggling closer as they finished their story, "I love our family." Amanda's heart overflowed with gratitude as she realized that her daughter would grow up knowing healthy family dynamics, mutual respect, and the difference between love and obligation. Where are you watching from today? Have you ever had to rebuild family relationships after betrayal and hurt? Share your thoughts about forgiveness and second chances in the comments below. And if this story touched your heart, please like this video and subscribe for more incredible tales of faith, family, and the power of choosing love over revenge.